It says in Pirkei Avot that if people gather and there's no words of Torah spoken, that it's a wasted gathering. And while I'm standing here by myself, I do believe that there are people listening and watching, so I do want to share a little bit of Torah with you this morning. I've often thought about the Kohen who is required to stand outside a funeral, prohibited from coming into the building. We have a couple of Kohanim that are in that circumstance, and there are a couple of people in our congregation who are Kohanim and are in that circumstance. And up until we had this streaming, they could listen outside, but they couldn't see what was going on. And in some ways, it's a terrible tragedy that they can't. It's prescribed in the opening words of this morning's parsha, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Emor laKohanim b'nei Aaron, ve'amarta alehem, l'nefesh lo yitma be'amav, that no dead person should come into contact, or the priest, the high priest, the Kohen, and his children and his offspring for the generations shouldn't come into contact with the dead. And that is exactly where that prescription comes from. It's biblical. It's Deoraita. It's from the Torah. And I was thinking how many people in the last few weeks have lost loved ones and have been unable to be at the funeral. And I tell you this right now, there is no substitute for being there. A dear friend of mine passed away, and his beloved wife couldn't even be at the funeral because she couldn't travel from Florida all the way up here. And I can't even imagine the pain of not being able to be there. I recognize that standing by the graveside is one of the most challenging, difficult moments in a person's life. I recognize that those are images that are ingrained in our subconscious, and we know that they'll never be erased. The sound of the first shovel of earth into the grave is incredibly painful, but all the more painful if you can't be there. Can't imagine what it feels like not to be able to be by the graveside. I know that I have a warped sense of life and death because the job of the rabbi is to be around death so much, to be with people as they take their last breath. Oh, the kedusha of that moment, the holiness of being there. To be with families as they've lost loved ones, to stand at the graveside as they bury those who are dear to them. I recognize how difficult it is and how warped my perspective is on life because I'm surrounded by death so much. Maybe it's good for me, maybe it's bad for me. But it does give you a warped sense of perspective. Because our people, our message to the world is Uvacharta b'chayim, you should choose life at every turn. While there are those around us in the cultures that worship the dead, who value death more than they do life, who look for the wonderful death rather than the extraordinarily life, we have always been a people that says, you can push us down, but we will survive. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai. We believe in Chaim. That's why every time we make a toast, we say, L'chaim. L'chaim tovim u'l'shalom. L'chaim tovim u'l'shalom. We want a song in our hearts that speaks of a life of good and peace. We crave life. I tell you, in these weeks, I've gotten into a terrible habit. The habit that I've gotten into is watching TV just at the moments when they announce the death tolls And I look for those death tolls to go down. And they do. Thank God. I remember weeks and weeks ago, the tolls were high in the high 600s, and now we're well low 200s. Thank God for all the people's lives that have been saved. In this tragedy, our hearts go out to those families where the losses have been so great. 27,521 New Yorkers have passed away in this. The numbers are astounding. But we shouldn't be focused on the deaths. We should be focused on the people who survived. The people who went into hospitals and came out. Not the people who went in and died. The Zohar asks the question, why can't the priest be around the death? Think about it. Their entire existence is about destroying animals' lives. So the rabbis teach us, you got to draw a line somewhere. You got to say to yourself, I'm not going to be surrounded by death all the time. And that when it matters most, when it's the people who I love, I'm going to try my very best to be distant from the pain and suffering of the loss of life. Marabo masech Adonai, says Rabbi Yehuda in the Zohar, how abundant is God's greatness, who wrought shelter before those who believe in God. God protects us. God saves us. We can't think about the God who's destroying life. We can't think about the virus that's taking over our world. We have to marabu masech Adonai, look for the joy. Look for the greatness. Look for the triumph. Look for the saving lives. How abundant is God's goodness. How precious is the goodness called the goodness of God. God blesses us. It would be easy at this time to become depressed and saddened by the overwhelming loss that's being experienced in this world right now. It would be so easy to be overwhelmed by the pain and the suffering, by the confinement, by the quarantine. But says the Zohar, Emor LaKohanim, speak to the Kohen powerfully, and say, it's not all about death and destruction. Vayimna merisha'im ora urzura. Oram uzara ramati shaber, you have wrought for those who shelter in you, that you have created the world, that light radiated from the beginning of the world to its end. Says the Zohar, this is a world filled with light. It's not a world of darkness. You can, if you want, choose to focus on the darkness, or you can choose to focus on the light. And after phrase, quote after quote, it says, Lecha Adonai hagdula v'agvura v'atiferet v'anetzach v'aod. Come see the greatness in the world, the inventions, the discoveries. Lecha Adonai hagdula v'hagvura v'atiferet v'hanetzach v'haod. We sing it every Shabbos. The Zohar says this is the song you have to sing when you're in your darkest hour. You have to say, there is more to this. I wish I could take every one of you and hold you up. It's the job of the rabbi to bring and raise up his community in times of darkness. When anti-Semitism raged in front of us, I said, Shomer Adonai et kol oavav, God, save all of us. I wish I could pick you all up and hug you and put your pieces back together and say, we're going to be all right. But I give you the song of the Zohar. Lecha Adonai hagedula, v'hagevura, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach, v'haod. Ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz, lecha Adonai hagedula. God, come, we can see your righteousness in the world. And that's what makes us righteous, and the psalmist taught us that. And Chronicles taught us that. And the prophet Malachi taught us that. And Job taught us that. These are all the quotes from this morning. And then the Zohar asks one final question. Who is righteous? A person who can see shining faces that are joined together with them. A person who can see shining faces, that's what makes somebody righteous. You can be righteous. This is how the righteous work. They see the good. They feel the good. They recognize the positive. So I say today, join the righteous and see the world in a positive way. Don't focus on the death and the destruction. Don't focus on the confinement, but in the liberating joys that we experience in our lives today. I feel terrible for those who have lost loved ones. My heart goes out to them. But our job is to raise them up with the positive message of those persons' lives, of the way those people affected us. Raise us up. Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha. Raise us up so that we can do the service of God in joy. So sing with me one more time. Lecha Adonai hagedula ve'hagevura ve'atiferet ve'hanetzach ve'haon ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz Lecha Adonai hamemlacha ve'hamitnaseh lechol lerosh romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu Lehar kodsho romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. There are mountains on the horizon. We're climbing them. But wait till we get to the top and we see the view. It's extraordinary. Shabbos. Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. It's a pleasure to have been with you again this week. Stay safe. Stay home. And if you can't stay home, you got to go out, take a mask with you, cover your face. If it's not for you, do it for someone else. Sometimes we're more easily motivated by what we can do for others than what we can do for ourselves. It's a terrible sin that we don't take care of ourselves that same way, but take care of everybody around you. Hug and kiss the people you can. Think about those who you can't be in contact with. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everybody, a safe and a healthy week, and we'll see you again soon. I'd remind you, we still are a functioning shul. I hope that you will take out an ad for our cantor in the journal this coming June. We're going to be celebrating with her Friday night. We're going to have a special service. I think it's June 12th. I may be wrong about that, so take a look in your email for those things. But whatever you do, make sure you buy an ad. Okay. So Shabbat Shalom. This is the part where, normally I tell a couple of jokes. So I have a couple of really good ones that I really enjoy. But I usually work on the presentation more, and I didn't have a chance to this week. So I'm just going to read it, and I'll do my very best with the delivery. So, you know that hospitals have a regulation that anybody who is leaving the hospital has to leave in a wheelchair. I don't know what that's all about, but I have regularly seen it in action. A gentleman says to himself, I don't want to get in the wheelchair. The nurse says to the gentleman, you have to get in the wheelchair. It's the rule. The guy says, no, I don't want to get in the wheelchair. The nurse says, in order to be discharged, you have to get in the wheelchair. So sit down and I'll push you out. And he says, how about you sit down and I'll push you out? And the nurse says, please, give me a break. I've been working hard. I just want to take you out. So you need to get in the wheelchair. After a chat about the rules being rules, he reluctantly let the nurse get into the wheelchair. She wheeled him to the elevator, and on the way down, the nurse asked him if his wife would be meeting him at the car. He responded, I don't know. He said, she's still upstairs in the bathroom changing out of her hospital gown. Ba-dum-bump. Told you it wasn't going to be in the delivery. So let me just read this one straight out to you. Couple in their 90s are both having problems remembering things. During a checkup, the doctor told them that they were physically okay, but they might want to start writing things down to help them remember. Later that night, watching TV, the old man gets up from his chair, turns to his wife, says, "Want anything? I'm going into the kitchen." So she says, "Yeah, will you get me a bowl of ice cream?" "Yeah, sure, get you a bowl of ice cream." So the wife says to him, "Don't you think you should write it down so you'll remember?" So he responds, "No, I can remember. It's not a big thing. It's just a bowl of ice cream." She says, "Well, I'd like some strawberries on top, and maybe you should write that down." He says, "No, I'm going to remember a bowl of ice cream and some strawberries. I don't have to write it down." She says, "Well, I would also like whipped cream. So maybe now it's 3 things. You should write it down." He says, "What are you talking about? I don't have to write it down. It's ice cream and strawberries and whipped cream. I'll remember that. They all go together." So he goes into the kitchen. He comes back. About 20 minutes later, the man returns from the kitchen and he hands his wife a plate of toast and eggs. She stares at it for a moment and she says, "What about the hash browns?" All right, that's all I got for you. Hey, have a great Shabbos. I'll catch you on the rebound. Stay warm because it got cold outside for whatever reason. It's windy, so put a hat on if you're going to go outside because you don't want to mess up your hair. That's why I always wear a hat. And I'll see you later. Hopefully I'll see you in some of my Zoom classes over the course of the week. And remember, Wednesdays at 6:30. Wednesdays at 6:30, I'm reading bedtime stories. So if you have children, grandchildren, meet me on Zoom at 6:30 on Wednesdays. I'll talk to you later.